Everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide some advice and information to those of you in attendance on the topic of self-care. So we're joined on today's webinar by a colleague of mine, Liam. I'll pass over to Liam to introduce himself.
Hello everybody, my name is Liam Ballock. I am the clinical lead here at CareFirst. I've worked with CareFirst since it would have been May time 2017, so we're kind of coming towards 3 years. I've worked in a telephone counselling role and then was awarded a promotion into the clinical lead role. My role fundamentally is to clinically supervise the counsellors that offer support to members of staff from all of the organisations that we have contracts with, and just to offer them general support. I obviously also deal with any escalated issues or requests for additional sessions that may come through. So that's my role, and yeah, I hope you enjoy today's webinar.
Thanks, Liam. And for those of you who can see me, some of you may recognise me from your organisation. My name is Stefan, and I'm one of the service managers at CareFirst. With the current situation affecting people in lots of different ways, we thought it would be appropriate to theme a webinar around self-care. So self-care is a term that in counselling circles will be used frequently and discussed frequently, but also you might have seen it in the media more recently, where there's been a particular focus on mental health and staying well and keeping well during this time. There have been some articles I've seen on the theme of self-care. So I just wanted to pass over to Liam firstly. Liam, are you able to kind of explain what's meant by self-care, if you like?
Yeah, okay. So self-care, without wanting to oversimplify it in any way, shape or form, is fundamentally the care of self. And that sounds like a bit of an obvious answer, but that's fundamentally what it is. And I think if we were to think about examples of self-care in our day-to-day lives, they can be big things and they can be small things. So for myself, I'm an avid enjoyer of hot chocolate. I enjoy a good hot chocolate, and for me that is part of my self-care routine. That makes me feel better. It improves my mood, and so self-care can range from small things like that to big things like going to the gym and exercising and meditating or whatever it may be. And fundamentally, all of those things added together manage our mood and keep our mood at a level that is healthy. And so it's going to be different for everybody. And the level of self-care that you need will vary depending on who you are and how resilient you are, I suppose, in life. So yeah, that's fundamentally what self-care is.
Great. And for anybody who possibly, part of their self-care routine previously might have been things that take place outside of the house. It could be buying yourself a treat in a coffee shop, whatever it may be, meeting up with friends, whatever it might be that people do to look after themselves and check in with themselves. What sort of things can people be doing in the current time to still be attending to their needs whilst they're not able to go about it in the normal way?
Well, I think one of the answers, I suppose, is to engage in the blessing that is technology. The fact that you and I and however many other attendees of this webinar are managing to be together and to discuss this subject is a testament to that. And so being able to use that technology to connect with your friends, to connect with your family, is massively important, and also to connect with your work colleagues is massively important in doing that. I have kind of created a bit of a list of things that I wanted to talk through today. So hopefully something from what I say is going to resonate with some of you and be helpful. The first, I suppose, fairly obvious subject that I wanted to cover is around anxiety. Anxiety is something that is going to be triggered for a lot of people in the current circumstances, particularly those who may struggle with health anxiety. And fundamentally, anxiety is a response to the uncertainty that surrounds us at this time. And sometimes anxiety is a felt response to a lack of control. So think of ways, I suppose one of the bits of advice around looking after yourself and self-care is about thinking of ways that you can bring that control back into your life. And I find that simple things like organising and tidying the space that I'm working in helps me manage my anxiety levels. Communication when it comes to anxiety is also a really important way of managing anxiety, by talking about how we're feeling with people that we know, love and trust. It brings the anxiety out into the open and less hidden. And obviously when things are hidden, often we become scared of those things. So being able to communicate it and bring it out into the open is a really important way of being able to manage that anxiety. If you know somebody who is struggling with anxiety at the moment, my advice around that, particularly if you're maybe a manager or somebody in a position of authority within the organisation, supporting other members of staff, or whether it's just a colleague that you're working with or a friend, my advice, I suppose, would be just to listen and really try to resist. And this is hard for all of us, I hasten to add, but really try to resist the temptation to fix it. Because ultimately, particularly in these circumstances that we all find ourselves in at the moment, there is no way of you being able to fix it. You can't fix it. So just listening and normalizing their experience, but not in a way that makes it about others. So what I mean by that is sometimes we hear a problem, we hear from a friend or a colleague that they're struggling, and we might respond and say, something like, "Oh, loads of people feel that way." And although that may, in a lot of cases, be true, what that does is it takes the focus away from that individual and may make them feel less important. So my advice would be to instead try something like, so you could say something like, "This is such an extreme situation. No one really knows what is going to happen. And so feeling the way that you do is totally normal. It's a totally normal response to that." And so that's just a simple example of kind of how you can engage in a conversation with somebody who might be struggling with anxiety. Another thing that people can do is to create what we refer to, I suppose, as a can-do list. As we said, people who are anxious generally worry about a lot of things they have no control over. So if you write a list of all the things that you're worrying about, and once you complete that, address each point in the list which with the thought, can I do anything about it? And if you can, leave it on the list. If you can't, cross it off. And it's important to physically cross it off, because there is something about that process that is important and that helps us feel like we're kind of taking that off the list. And then once you come to the end of the list and you've gone through that process, you can now go back to the things on the list that you can take control of or do something about. these are things that you can focus your mind on. So, for example, I need a place to work which is not the sitting room or my bedroom. So what about maybe creating a space on the landing or in the hall, or as weather improves, the shed, if you have a space like that. If I tidied that space I have under the stairs, at least it would be tucked away. Creating solutions for yourself. You might want to talk through the things that you have left on your list with another person to come up with some creative ideas, and that also gives you an opportunity to connect with others, which is what we've already talked about. Importantly, though, notice the things that you've crossed off that you cannot do anything about, and acknowledge that there is nothing that you can do about that. Sometimes it's really important. Well, I would say most of the time it's really important to acknowledge those things that we don't have control over, because like we were talking about earlier, acknowledging it and bringing it out into the open allows you to feel more in control of that thing. If we hide it and we don't talk about it, then it's something that controls us rather than us being able to control it, if that makes sense. And I would suggest, repeating this process each day to focus you and to keep you motivated. You should notice that often the things you worry about are the same, and you're not able to do anything about them. So continue to focus on what you can do. Another suggestion when it comes to self-care is to take up a hobby that goes shelved because you didn't have time. I think if there's one thing that we can all agree on at the moment is that we definitely have time on our hands. We're not exactly limited in our time at the moment. So, think about that thing that you've always wanted to do. The beauty of technology is that there are YouTube videos for, quite frankly, everything you can think of. And so if you have, if you spent your life wishing that you could play the piano, watching a video on learning to play the piano, whatever it might be, take up that hobby. One thing that is going on a lot in a lot of different communities across the country at the moment is there's lots of kind of community-led support projects, I suppose, going on to support the NHS. So learning to knit, to make the pairs of hearts the NHS are asking for, or try cooking some new recipes. Those are just some of the kind of hobbies that you could maybe think about coming up with. Knitting is definitely not going to be one of my hobbies, because that's not something that I have any skill in any way, shape or form. Another issue, just kind of moving on from anxiety, and I think before anybody gets worried about moving on from that, I hope that's been helpful. I think there is going to be a Q&A section at the end. So if you have any questions about some of the stuff that I've already said, or any of the things that I'm about to go on and say, just make a note of them, and we can always address those questions at the end. So moving on from anxiety, another area where people may be struggling at the moment is stress. And again, this could be being triggered by lots of things. Money difficulties, job security, family being around you constantly, children being around you constantly, your wife or your husband or your partner being around you constantly, a lack of knowledge, a lack of kind of surety as to what tomorrow is going to bring, or the next day can trigger stress. Or a lack of understanding of the guidance that we've been given by the government. Maybe some people feel that that's unclear, not really knowing what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. That can create stress. And so some preventative actions could be to involve meditation or mindfulness. There are lots of apps out there to help you with this. Planning your day, and that sounds like a really simplistic solution, but having a plan for your day and making sure that in that plan you include what I refer to as kind of free time, so that you are able to be creative in your day. And so although it's important to have structure, and that can help our stress levels, it's also important to have a space where you're able to be creative with your time and just be able to do whatever it is that you feel like doing, even if it's something you've already done that day. Another tip would be to create space for each other within the house. If you're living by yourself, then maybe space is the opposite of what you feel you need at the moment, which is understandable. But if you're living in a house with a partner or a family, making sure that you create space for each other and communicate that need. So being able to say to your partner, I'm just going to go upstairs and give myself, 10 minutes to just kind of be by myself, being able to communicate that is important. Making sure to do one thing outside each day is really important, so that you don't feel kind of cooped up in the house, and also just to improve your physical health, but also to promote those good toxins within our body, which improve our mood generally, and taking advantage, I suppose, of the one bit of exercise that we're allowed outside each day, and making sure to actually physically go outside is important. And if you're blessed, like I am with a garden, any opportunity I have to go outside, I take that opportunity. So those are some of the ways that that you could maybe think about managing your stress levels. So again, moving on from that, another area that could be affected is sleep and diet, and it's really important at this time, particularly, to try and maintain the good patterns and the good behaviours that we have around sleep and diet. And use this time to, if you don't have those patterns, or you struggle with those patterns, maybe using this time to begin to eat more healthily. I think, the fact that the vast majority, I suppose, of fast food restaurants are closed nowadays, so there isn't as much opportunity, I suppose, and we have to rely on those things that we get for ourselves in our weekly shop to give us nutrition and to keep us healthy and to keep our bodies well. But alongside diet, sleep is massively important when it comes to a well-managed mood. So trying to implement, I suppose, those important behaviours and patterns. There are lots of really useful, particularly around sleep, there are lots of really useful resources for sleep on the NHS website, which I would direct you to. I think they have a whole pamphlet or booklet on creating good sleep patterns. So definitely have a look at that. The next area that I want to focus on is a big area for what's going on at the moment. And it's particularly around the issue of loss or grief and bereavement. And it's something that a lot of people, if we're watching the news, there are lots of people that are dying at the moment, and it's extremely sad. And, as the politicians keep saying to us, behind those numbers are people, are, families and people that are left behind, and it's incredibly sad for them. And so you may be experiencing that loss and bereavement at this time, and if you are, my heart goes out to you. Or you may know somebody that is, and people's experience of this is going to be potentially very complex during this time, during and after this time, I suppose, because at the moment people are not able to see their loved ones before they die. And because of that, there is a lack of an ending in that relationship, and an ending with those people that they loved. And there's guilt as well that people may be experiencing around not being there for that person when they passed away. and also sadness that their loved ones were alone when they died. And so there are levels to the grief that people are going to be experiencing at this time that is complex. And if you are someone who has experienced a loss, then it's important that you know from me, but I hope from other people that are saying this to you, that how you're feeling right now is totally normal and natural. It's a natural reaction. Your body is trying to make sense of something that makes no sense and can't be explained. And so how you're feeling is normal, and it's important to know that. It's important that you talk about how you are feeling. And as most of you know, CareFirst run a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week counselling helpline. That service has not been interrupted in any way, shape or form. Our advisors and our counsellors are waiting at the other end of the phone and are willing to spend time with you and talk with you about how you're feeling. So take advantage of that. And it's important as well that you think about ways that you can have an ending of sorts with that person. So even something as simple as writing a letter to that person who has died, and being able to express, I suppose, how you feel about them, and being able to take it from within you and within your mind and within your body and actually put it down on a piece of paper. Physically putting it down is important. Other ways of doing that is being able to say good morning or good night to that person at the beginning and end of the day. I don't do this personally, but I know somebody close to me who has not in this situation, but previous to the COVID-19 outbreak many years ago, lost a son, sadly. And what he does is he sets an alarm on his phone, so 5 p.m. every afternoon the alarm goes off, and he takes himself away from whatever he's doing, and he spends time talking to his son. And for him, that's meaningful. That gives him a place to put his grief, and it's important that everybody finds a way of doing that. So just being able to put those feelings somewhere is important, and share this with loved ones that are still here with you. Share how you're feeling with those that are also grieving. Know that although nothing can bring that person back in time, it will get easier to live, and the time of that will vary. I would love to be able to sit here and say it will take 6 months, and then after 6 months everything will be okay. That's not how grief works. It's not how bereavement works. And some would argue, nor should it, because those people that you've lost are not people that, they've been with you all your life. 6 months is, you're never going to forget them. But as your body and your mind and your heart starts to process what has happened and comes to terms with that and the reality of it, it gets easier to live. And an important part of that, I would say, and this is not something that I'd written down, but it's just something that I'm thinking of now. It's important to, and this may be hard, so I apologize if this comes across hard, but it's important to use the word dead. Some people shy away from that word, but it has meaning. It has a finality to it that is important for us to use that word, because it's important for us to come to terms with the reality of the situation. And so that's something that I just wanted to add in there. Another opportunity, I suppose, to look after yourself and for some self-care is to make a memory box. So of objects that are meaningful to you, of the person that you've lost, and think about how you can maybe incorporate a remembrance object that may be known only to you. So something in the house, or maybe if you've got a garden, you can plant a tree in memory of that person, and that can be your special object, I suppose. And then if you're someone who is trying to support someone who has experienced a loss or a bereavement, as I've talked about before, really, listen, resist the temptation to try and fix it for them. You can't. And continue to normalize how that person is feeling. Continue to reassure that person that how they're feeling is normal and that you're there for them and that you will listen to them whenever they need it. And then the final point before I hand back to Stefan is I wanted to talk about our homes or the places that we're living in. Generally speaking, in normal times, our home is supposed to be our refuge, our place of sanctuary from the world. And at the moment, it may be feeling for a lot of people that it's turning into more of a prison. And so make sure that you make the most of particularly your 1 hour of outside exercise. And like I said earlier, resist the temptation to just use that hour to do nothing. Go out and go for a walk. Even if you don't do the full hour, just go for 10, 15, 20 minutes, something outside, and try to go away from your house if you can. I would say in your house, try to separate out an area specifically for work if you're working from home, and separate that out from the rest of your house. And if you can, try not to go into that place of work unless you're working. If you think about our normal day, our work is not our home. Generally, most of us will be going to a place of work and then coming from that place of work to go home, and they are separate. In this time, we don't have that luxury, but we are able to create that for ourselves if it's possible. If we have, additional room space that we can do that, then definitely do that. And also try to achieve things in your house that you've previously not had time for. Painting the room that you've been wanting to paint for a long time, doing those DIY projects that everybody, including myself, just puts on the to-do list and then just never thinks about. Trying to make that thing that I suppose trying to make that refuge for ourselves in our home. This is, again, we're not lacking in time at the moment, so being able to make the most of that and being able to do those things in our home that will make that home special to us is really important at the moment. And that's it. I think I think that there's bound to be things that I've probably missed. And what I didn't say at the beginning, I suppose, is that everybody's self-care is going to be individual to them. And so it may be that everything that I've said is totally irrelevant to you, but it may be that something from it has been useful, and I hope it has been useful. And yeah, I'll hand back to Stefan.
Great, thanks for that, Liam, and that was really helpful. Before we draw this webinar to a close, we wanted to provide an opportunity for anybody to ask any questions that they may have. There's a questions pane that you should have access to on the computer that you're viewing the webinar through. Please feel free to type any questions that you've got. I'll read the question aloud, and I'll invite Liam to answer. I won't read your name out. It will remain anonymous. We'll just hold on for a couple of moments now to see if any questions come through. So a question's come through. So have you got any advice for self-care for those who are working full-time? I don't know, Liam, if you've got any thoughts on that?
Say that again, sorry, Stefan.
Advice for somebody who's working full-time on how they can attend to their own self-care, the things that they can do if they're working full-time.
So I think making most of the evenings, or I'm assuming, by full time, I'm hoping anyway that we don't mean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if we do, then my advice to somebody who may be working such lengthy hours would be to maybe think about how you could reduce those hours. But assuming that you're not working every hour of every day, to make the most of the time that you're not working is important. I wonder if what the person means is that maybe if there are some self-care tips for whilst they're at work, how they can look after themselves. So I'll comment on that. I would hope that everybody that's working full-time has an opportunity to have a break during the day. My suggestion would be to make sure that you walk away from your place of work. So if you are at home and you're in front of a computer all day, physically walking away from that computer. If you can go outside for your break time, go outside. I often use my breaks to catch up on TV episodes that I haven't been watching for a long time, because that allows my brain to just kind of switch off a little bit, and to not have to think about work for 40 minutes or whatever it might be. Listening to music is another way of being able to switch off. I think it's about making the most of the break that you have. I find that quite important. And being able to remind yourself that, particularly if you're in a kind of maybe a high stress job or a fast paced environment, being able to remind yourself that you can only do one thing at a time. None of us are superhuman. And being kind to yourself and giving yourself permission to take your time with a piece of work, is really important. So I don't know whether I've answered that question. I hope that's been useful.
Thanks for that, Liam. There's some questions on similar themes coming through. So firstly, are there any tips on helping parents with school-aged children help them, the children that is, to cope in the current situation without resorting to too much screen time? So I know that that's been a particular thing that we've seen discussed quite frequently. Supporting children to still learn and still have activities to do, but without that being solely YouTube based or things like that. Is there any advice or information that you think would be appropriate to help in perhaps the younger people?
Well, there are lots of. There's one particular resource which I'll mention, which is called the Young Minds Parent Helpline. So Young Minds is an organisation set up to support young people who may be struggling with their mental health, and they run a parent helpline, which is staffed by experts in this field. And I'm not an expert in this field in any way, shape or form, but I have signposted people to that resource before, and it's always been incredibly useful to them. That's the feedback that I've got. What I would say is that the thought, I suppose, that initially came into my mind was around incorporating your children into the day planning, and making sure that they have that they're under, I suppose, that there's an agreement in place that we can't spend all day every day in front of a screen. So let's plan our day together and incorporate them into that decision making. Limit the choices that they have, because I find that sometimes children, if they have too much choice, can struggle to actually make a decision. So narrow it down within your mind to a few choices of what they can do at certain times, and then sit down with them and talk to them about what they want to do between those choices, and involve them in that planning. I know that there is, I can't think of his surname, but he's been all over the news at the moment. Joe
Wicks.
He's Joe Wicks. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you, Stefan. So he's doing, and I know that's YouTube and it's screen time. I understand that, but it's important that children particularly are kept moving, and their bodies are kind of kept healthy. So making the most of what he's offering, and I'm sure that there are loads of other people doing the same thing across the internet. And then going back to, think back to what you did as a child, when the internet either didn't exist or was in its kind of, early days, Monopoly, Cluedo, all of those board games are still classic ways of being able to connect with a family. Sometimes they cause friction, I understand that, but sometimes, hopefully it will cause some healthy friction and will bring families together and you'll be able to have an enjoyable time. My absolute favourite game at the moment is Uno. I'm obsessed with it. I'm quite competitive, so maybe that's another way as well. But just going back to those basic things that I guess you and I used to do as children, and encouraging them to use their imagination. I remember, just to share a bit about my life, I'm the youngest of 6 boys, and so there were a lot of boys in one house, and we used to play Quasar with coat hangers. So we used to run around the house with coat hangers and pretend to shoot each other. And it's little things like that was just totally imagination based. And so just trying to come up with some creative ideas, but involve the young people in that decision making, I suppose, would be my advice.
Great, thanks for that, Liam. And a question, I'll paraphrase because there's a couple of variations of it that have come through, but in terms of the level of information that young children and younger people have on the pandemic, I mean, they're less likely, I suppose, to have watched or understood, if they've watched it fully, the government briefings on it each day. But I mean, would it be appropriate to share all information with young children or younger people on the situation with the pandemic? I'm thinking around the loss and these types of things and how widespread that is, or is it more appropriate to be selective with the information that's shared?
I guess it would depend on the age of the child. I think the younger, I guess you have to tailor your conversations with your children to their age. And I'm hoping that maybe some of these people that are asking this question have got maybe friends who have got children similar to their in terms of age. Talking with your friends about how they've had these conversations with their kids is one thing that I'd advise you to do. But I do think it's important, it's absolutely necessary, I would say, that you communicate with your children what's going on and why. I've got friends myself who have got children who were in year 6 and have finished school without a proper goodbye, finished primary school where they've spent the last 6-7 years of their life. I guess there's a loss there for them. And it's important that they're able to communicate that with you as their mum or their dad. But it's also important that you're able to explain to them why this has happened and doing it in a way that's appropriate to their age. But it is important that you discuss what is happening, definitely. But I think you are best suited as their mum and their dad. You know them definitely better than I do, to communicate and to think about how best to have that conversation. And if you have children that are different ages, then have separate conversations, and tailor those conversations, because teenagers, they are internet wizards. They have this information at their fingertips probably quicker than we do a lot of the time. And so, they're very well informed already, but still have those conversations and create opportunity for them to ask questions and to talk about what's going on and to talk about how they're feeling. That's really important.
Great. Thanks very much, Liam. We're going to draw the webinar to an end there, and thank you everyone who's submitted questions and everybody who's joined the webinar today. Thanks, Liam, to you as well for all of your knowledge that you've imparted on us and expertise. I know that I've learned a lot from you today. So really appreciate that. Just to
welcome.
answer the one point that's come up a couple of times, this webinar is recorded, and if you follow the link that you originally used to register for the webinar, post-webinar, that will become a way of viewing the recorded file. So you don't need to do anything else. If you were to just try and re-register using that original link, you'll find that you watch a recorded version of this webinar. So you'll have access to it, particularly those of you that had any sound issues at the start. You'll be able to access the full recording in its entirety, and that'll be available within about 40 minutes of the end of the webinar. Thanks, everyone. We're going to end the webinar now. But if you have any questions at all, please do feel free to email them into us at CareFirst. It's info@care-first.co.uk. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.